10. Chaos Song. Who shall decide when doctors disagree? Alexander Pope. A groan, a sort of choked howl came from the prostrate form of the doctor, and the Reverend Trelaw dashed over to the altar. "What's happening, Reverend?" asked Peter, following, the glowing medallion momentarily forgotten. "Is he coming round?" "Quite the opposite." Trelaw put his hand on the doctor's chest, feeling the heart inside beating irregularly. Then, feeling a strange sort of echo, he felt on the other side and found another heart, just as chaotically faltering. "I think he's dying. Oh my God!" The exclamation was heartfelt. The Reverend Trelaw looked up at the inhabitants of the church. "His hearts, they've stopped beating." Chad Boyle was about to finish it, about to twist the sword and pull it out. "Bye, Doctor," he smiled. "It's all over. Now I can go back home." His grip tightened on the hilt of the sword. 9.5 stone of flying ex-schoolmate struck Chad Boyle in the upper back. He fell, letting go of the sword. When he looked up, there stood Ace, glaring down at him. "Leave him alone, you bastard!" she yelled. The doctor was still on his knees, clutching his side. He held up a hand to Ace. Watching to see if Chad tried to stand, she took it. "We must get to the pit," the doctor winced. "But Doctor, what about—" "Ignore him. We haven't much time. Trust me." And with that, the Time Lord started to hobble off, looking as if he was about to drop any second, towards the mountain in the distance. Ace glanced back after Chad, who was scrambling for his sword, then dashed after the doctor. "Say thank you," she blurted out as she caught up with him, more directly than she would have liked. "Thank you," replied the doctor, his voice a whisper. He was parchment white, blood slopping down his waistcoat. Oh God, he was going to die. Ace took his arm and added her strength to his. "You're angry," the doctor gritted his teeth. "With yourself? With me? Come on, talk to me." Ace realised that without the distraction of her speech, he would pitch over there and then. "I was angry with you," she replied, letting her words trip over each other as she spilled out all the emotion that she had stored up. "But I'm angry at myself too, because I got a world where everything could have been great, a really soft place. But I couldn't make it work. I made it full of things that I hate in the real world, because some bit of me still wants to go out there and fight. For Manisha, for me." She bit her lip as the tears started to fall. "For you!" "Yes." The doctor glanced across at her, his eyes dark and half closed. "You live in paradise. You start to wonder who empties the bins. I made the same move long ago. Do you still hate me for getting you killed?" "I got myself killed when I got on board your bloody TARDIS," cried Ace. "That's the deal, right? You can fight the world or you can be safe. If you're safe, you don't get hurt. If you fight, then you do. No choice, Doctor. No choice at all." They fought on up the hill, the wind whipping around them, and Ace had to shout even louder to make herself heard. "But you always seem to be so good at this. You always seem to be in control." A dot of blood was running from the doctor's nose, and Ace, somewhere in her jumbled thoughts, realised that he was concentrating on something else, something far away. "If there's a smile on my face," he whispered, "it's only there trying to fool the public. When it comes down to fooling you..." He left the sentence unanswered. Ace grinned quickly, feeling that her tears were only the edge of a vast lump of grief that was fighting its way up out of her stomach. She glanced back and saw that Chad Boyle had stood up and was clutching his head, reeling. "Doctor, what's up with him?" "The Timewyrm's having trouble keeping control. Its communications were breaking down anyway. They'll be worse now it's killed me." "Killed you?" "Yes. Come on." The lumbering couple made their way towards the lower slopes of the mountain and began the slow climb up its rocky heights. "I can't save him." Trelaw was administering artificial respiration. "Saul, do something," he shouted. "I cannot." Saul was as distraught as the Reverend. "I am attempting to shock a heart into action, but with only minor response." "Ernest," The Church's voice broke with grief. "The Doctor is dead." The Timewyrm had felt the datascape convulse with pain. The map spasmed suddenly. Territory began to swiftly erode. Several books in the library burst into flame, the knowledge on their pages dying moment by moment. "It is time," the virus had cried out, checking to see that its perception of the scene was not at fault. "My freedom is at hand." Chad had wanted to end all this here and now. He had a feeling that if he slew the villain, came to the last chapter in the story, then he'd be whisked back home. The pain in his head was telling him the opposite. Excited by the approach of victory, the Timewyrm had taken him in its fist and possessed him. Boyle's face calmed, and the dragon mask of the Timewyrm blended with his features. "Now," hissed Wormboyle, "battle is at hand." The Doctor and Ace had nearly reached the summit, clambering painfully over escarpments and large boulders. The Doctor was leaving a trail of blood behind him. "What will we find down this pit then, Professor?" Ace was trying to be cavalier. "Treat this as another exciting adventure." "Terrible things," the Doctor muttered. "Terrible. What's the time?" He fumbled for his fob watch. Ace frowned. "Does time mean anything here?" "My own time. Internal time. Wait." He paused, closed his eyes, and a gout of blood burst from his nose, trickling down his face as he concentrated frantically. Ace twitched as she saw it, wondering how much the Doctor had to lose. Whatever this place was, it looked as if the Doctor wasn't long for it. "Good," he muttered, opening his eyes once more. "Come on." They resumed their ascent. "Doctor," Ace decided that it was time for some answers. "Why don't I feel like a little girl anymore?" "That's a good sign. It means we might win. The probabilities are balancing. If the Timewyrm wins, you'll never get into secondary school. If I win, you've got a future." "Win?" "Get out alive," the Doctor quickly corrected himself, with a suspicious look around. As if talking to an audience, he added, "I think that's as much as we can hope for." Saul was panicking, little gusts of air running this way and that across the church. "What can we do?" he cried. "What can I do?" "Saul," shouted Emily, "don't worry. I can feel it. They're in terrible danger, but I know it's not over yet." "But he's dead." Trelaw held up his hands in futility. "What else is there to say? Who can save us now?" A grinding roar filled the church, together with a hum of building power. Saul's senses buzzed with the pulse of energy. "Look!" cried Peter. Where it had been left, on the floor of the church, the medallion was doing something astonishing. Before the startled eyes of the congregation, it was growing, getting bigger and bigger, the gem at its heart pulsing with an inner light. Emily and Peter hugged each other in fear as the ornament reached the size of a doorway, which was what it resembled, and then stopped. A vast gem stood in an enormous setting, upright and facing them. "What is it, Saul?" asked Trelaw, his voice full of wonder. "Is it a miracle?" "That depends on your definition," the church replied. "It is a very powerful object, giving off low-level radiation, quite safe for the moment, and capable of containing vast power." "The runes on the setting!" Peter walked over and cautiously reached out for the medallion. "Look at them now!" In the ornament's smaller state, the runes had been just that, indecipherable symbols, products of an alien culture. Now they formed recognisable English words. "Good Lord," Emily muttered. "They're in French." Her husband looked at her, puzzled. "No," she squinted at the letters. "They're in English, aren't they? For a moment I thought that—" "The letters do have a certain malleable quality," chimed Saul. "I am able to perceive them in Latin also." "Well, now that's a novelty." Peter took a step back and read out the letters. "Thank you for your faith. Fly down the corridor. Saul must create a power link. Time running out. the doctor. Quite hopeful for an epitaph, Emily murmured. The doctor and Ace stood before a gaping abyss. They had arrived at the top of the mountain and had found it to be hollow like a volcano. The pit descended into darkness, and there was a horrible echoing doom about the place. Far below, a tiny bridge stretched from one side of the crater to the other. A circular path led down to it. Carefully, the doctor started down the path. "What is this place?" asked Ace. "It's the doorway between one thing and another," murmured the doctor, his voice getting steadily weaker. "And the bridge is a connection, a pathway between two worlds also." "Cheers, Professor. Nice to get a straight answer." Ace's tone was flippant, but the doctor stopped and looked at her seriously. "I haven't been able to tell you anything. You never know when the Timewyrm might be listening. You're a good actress, but not that good." And then he continued down the path. Ace wondered if she'd been insulted or not. "A power link," Saul was pondering. "How do I do that?" "Well, it sounds like you should know." Peter was running his hands over the smooth surface of the gem. With a shout, he stepped backwards. "Dad!" he exclaimed. "Dad, but you're dead!" Emily ran to him and pulled him back from reaching out again. "That's what I felt," she exclaimed. "It takes you back to the past. It's full of memories." "I saw my father." Peter rubbed his brow. "He was opening an old box of books in the loft, cutting the string with a pair of scissors. I saw it so clearly, like I was there." The mathematician looked up at the rafters. "Is this what this thing is, Saul? A time machine?" No, I see it now." Saul became excited. "I felt its power when you touched the gem. It is a doorway into the mind, a tunnel into the depths of memory." "A tunnel?" Emily stared at the gem, and before her eyes it dissolved into an endless kaleidoscope of vanishing purples and blues. The colours formed a tunnel that blazed away to a vanishing point. "I see what you mean. That's the same effect that I saw outside the church when we were travelling." Peter raised a finger and tapped his nose. "So this is a time vortex too, which will lead to where the doctor is," Trelaw concluded triumphantly. The Hutchingses looked at him. "Well, I'm not a complete Philistine, you know." He smiled. Wormboil sprinted up the mountainside, regretting his host form's short legs. The storm was buffeting harder and harder, the wind nearly plucking the small boy off his feet. The worm was shouting powerful codes into the breeze, hoping to control some aspects of the rapidly disintegrating datascape. Nothing worked. The world was falling into chaos. In moments, it would all be over. The doctor had reached the bottom of the spiral path and stood at the end of the bridge, which, as Ace saw, was a thin span of organic-looking rock, like something formed by sediment in a cave. The lower surface was hung with stalactites. The whole scene felt wet, horribly biological. The pit below echoed with a distant sound that felt like breathing. Sharp gusts of hot air were buffeting up from below. "How do we get down there?" she shouted, seeing no handholds on the smooth vertical walls. "We fall," the doctor muttered. His gaze was sweeping the edge of the crater above him. "Come on! I'm not going to die because you're late. Not again." "Professor, what's down there?" Ace had thought she'd seen a movement in the depths below, a stirring of liquid darkness. "I don't know." The doctor glanced at her and smiled sadly. "How long is the coast to Britain?" "What? No idea." Ace was staring down into the pit, wondering if this was really important at the moment. Shakily, the doctor reached out a hand and raised her head to listen to him. "Don't gaze into the void," he advised. "Nietzsche said something similar. Also interesting things about fighting monsters. Pity about the rest of it. No, this is important. You could measure the coastline, couldn't you?" "Yeah, suppose so." "But how carefully do you measure?" The doctor was deadly serious. "With a meter rule, with a tape measure? Do you map every pebble, every tiny rock pool, even if they remained after the tide?" Well, you could go down to atomic level, making finer and finer measurements. You find more and more length, more little details. The length of the coast is infinite. The measurement depends on your distance from it. That's stupid. Ace checked herself. For a moment she had sounded like her city dream self. She was a citizen of the universe, so she was going to listen, right? Perhaps. Like the edge of a snowflake, or like this place. The dimensions are fractional. The length of information is infinite. Above them night was falling. The doctor talked faster, as the darkness of the sky above became of the same texture as that of the pit below. You can express shapes like that as equations. The Timewyrm virus is an equation like that. You mean it's infinite? Yes. Fractal. Its appearance depends only on the scale you view it from. Like that bully Boyle. He's not important. He's very important. He's the whole world. Are you following me? Yeah, Ace quickly nodded. She had a horrible feeling that this was the last lesson, that this wisdom was an epitaph, something to take with her. Using the equations you can write poetry, verse that corresponds to the dimensions of the worm itself. I learnt a poem like that a long time ago. I found it deep in my own dreams, instructed by a great teacher, before I found out all of what I am. The Timewyrm doesn't know its own potential either. It can't hear the equations that make it, and it can't hear the message I sent either. Ace was lost. I don't know what you mean, Professor, she sighed. The darkness was closing in. A low twilight was winding its way through the surroundings and seemed to be infesting her thoughts as well. Life is a fractal thing, Ace, said the doctor, his face hidden in shadow, his voice very far away. From a distance like Hemming saw it from, it's very simple. A question of cause and effect. You push, it moves. Ace could barely glimpse him now, fading as he was into the dark. Far away she could hear songs like ancient memories, female voices calling the doctor home. Life isn't like that. The smallest things have the biggest consequences. The beat of a butterfly's wing may topple a civilization. Life is chaos, and chaos never dies. No, Doctor, called Ace. Don't die! She looked around, trying to see through the gathering darkness. People need you! I need you! Don't go! Death awaits! The voice roared from the rim of the crater, a blast of flame illuminating the darkness. The Timewyrm dropped onto the bridge, its arms held wide, its nostrils belching gouts of fire into the night. It was majestic and triumphant. It is time. Come to me, Doctor. In the glare of fire, Ace glimpsed that the doctor had fallen and was laying at the edge of the crater, his body still. The Timewyrm strode forward. Ace stepped into its way. Move aside, girl, the virus snarled. He must die that I shall live, and I will live. So go ahead. Ace bit her lip and summoned all her courage. Try it. The two enemies stared at each other as the darkness closed in. If I were to use the rhythm that I was receiving earlier, Saul muttered, I could power up this gate and somebody could go and visit the doctor. Let's do it. Peter pulled off his jacket and threw it onto a pew. Ready when you are. But, began Emily. It will require more than mere power, Saul continued quickly. I will be able to open a... This is all merely instinctive to me. What did you call it? A time vortex, Peter frowned. I will be able to open a time vortex corridor into the doctor's location, but it will be necessary for somebody else to compute a path down the corridor. Somebody who can picture mathematical topography as we work. Very well, Trelaw nodded, stepping forward. Peter will do that work, and I shall go. If the corridor does lead into memory, as you call it, well, perhaps I am to be allowed a glimpse through the veil. It would kill you, Saul blurted, trying to be matter-of-fact. Your heart has been pushed too far. We have no idea what is on the other side of the gate. Wait a minute, Emily shouted, waving her hands to quieten the debate. I'll go. I'm young, I'm strong, and I don't have to do any maths. No, Peter shook his head. Absolutely not. Listen, that's why I'm here. Don't you see that we've been put here for a reason? A whole bundle of tiny circumstances brought us here. Tiny chances. We can't see the whole picture yet. Why I was given that baby, for instance. But there's a plan at work, and God, I want to go. Emily reached out to touch the edge of the spiralling vortex field. I want to see what's down that tunnel. I cannot help but agree, chorused Saul. Emily must go. Peter looked at his wife, hurt. How can I persuade you not to? He whispered. You can't. She kissed his forehead tenderly. You can just make sure I get to where I'm going. Listen, if you didn't want adventures, you shouldn't have married me. Maybe I didn't have a choice, muttered Peter. The Timewyrm was roaring as the darkness closed in, little bursts of blue flame puffing from its nostrils. Don't be a fool, it rumbled. I can destroy you now without compunction. You are no longer of use. Yippee-hi-yay, toe-rag, Ace grinned, wiping tears onto her sleeve. It's a good day to die. You will die anyway. The Timewyrm grinned steel. You do not understand. Too right, so tell me. Emily had an urge to hold her nose as she stood on the edge of the medallion's gateway, preparing to jump. She felt like a little girl, ready to hop into the pool for the first time. Are you absolutely sure? Peter was saying. I'm quite prepared to go if you don't want to. That would be impossible, Saul chimed in. It would be impossible to link with your brain as you move down the hyperspace tunnel. Shut up, Saul, muttered Peter, holding his wife. No, murmured Emily. I want to do this. To save their lives. And I think it's time that somebody saved that girl. But also because it's going to be interesting. That would be motive enough for you, dear, wouldn't it? Peter grinned and kissed her. I won't let anything happen to you, he promised. He had taken a deep breath and was trying not to cry. She, as always, was keeping a stiff upper lip. Don't worry. Emily gave Peter a final kiss and stepped towards the medallion gate. Ready, Saul? Peter felt a gentle mental tendril settle amongst his beloved equations. It seemed to delight in them as much as he did, if in a more instinctive, unlearned way, and he found himself experiencing the fond feeling of brotherhood that he associated with talking to fellow mathematicians. Ready, the church chorused. Peter found himself saying it at the same time. God bless you, my child. Trelaw touched Emily's head and looked into her eyes. May his power keep you safe wherever you go. I appreciate that, Reverend. Emily took a deep breath. I really do. OK, here we go. With a quick grin over her shoulder, the woman stepped forward, flinging herself into the purple-blue vortex. She spun away, getting smaller and smaller, until she was a dot vanishing into the distance. Contact maintained, sang Saul. We have locked on to the Doctor's harmonic pattern and are calculating a link. Peter found himself visualising multi-dimensional topography with fierce speed, aware that Emily's life depended on the precision of his work. A couple of times he panicked and nearly missed a contour, but Saul had the wit to see trends at least and was able to correct him. It was like being connected to a powerful computer, their collective resources being used to fly a distant kite through a thunderstorm. A living kite, a kite that Peter Hutchings loved more than ever before. The Doctor's thoughts were a flock of birds, flapping up in the path of the ferryman's barge. The ferryman caught the glint in one bird's eye and frowned, his worry spurring him to reach the dreaming spires of architecture that were his home. So close, said the sound of the bird's wings, so daring. The third Doctor was standing on the battlements of a proud fortress, simple designs covering its walls. He stood alone, his hands on his hips, staring out for the first sign of attack. He had no need of soldiers. The Doctor's thoughts came to him as the crying of a wolf in the far distance. He frowned, but his gaze did not falter. The librarian was running through the library, shunting aside books from the blaze that was consuming the place. He was holding up his hands in worry, scuttling between the blazing racks as fast as he could go. The Doctor's thoughts came to him in the form of blackened shards, blowing into his path like a fall of leaves. Some of them were alight with decaying ideas. "Am I on my way," said the shards, "to the zone that is prepared for me?" "No," shouted the librarian angrily. "You are destroying the library. There is no life for any of us now." "Too late," sighed the burning scraps, crackling. "It didn't work." "Then get back and make it work." The librarian threw down a volume on the floor. "There'll be no peace for you, no peace for any of us until you win." The shards fluttered away, the flames having left them. The librarian raised his nose and nodded proudly. Perhaps the youngster was finally paying attention to him. Emily spun down a corridor of voices, flashing of experience bursting all around her. Darkness, war, too much to remember, too much to die fully, something ancient and powerful crying its defiance as it was destroyed, its blood bursting over Emily in a burst of scarlet. But it lived on, in centuries that dashed past like translucent ghosts. Change, change, change. The wheel sped round, the cosmos expanded, whole worlds rose and fell. In all this time there was only Emily and the other. A squeal of forgotten pain, like brakes being applied, and Emily found herself shrieking too as she fought to clear her lungs of liquid and to gulp air. Things she remembered were forgotten. Birth thoughts blossomed around her, and Emily's tears streamed at the closeness of a mother's breast. Rough surroundings, someone watching from the door, a grand power that washed away into... Bitter fights, little wars, a dark child that seethed with jealousy, smashed glass, time running wild, and teachers roaring their rage, robed figures shunting this way and that through endless corridors, endless plots, dark whispers, and young eyes that saw it all and understood nothing. One eye in his hood, smiling and nodding, seeming to see Emily's flight and welcome her. Before him stood a bloom, my God, it was beautiful. It shimmered with an internal rainbow. And it was gone, flashed by, never to return, off on a burst of roses. Sadness eclipsed her, and she smelt gunfire and death, a figure stalking purposefully towards the buildings, pulling a hood over his stark features. Time to run, time to get away from this old place, time to change the world. The memories swept past her, speeding up into a babble of voices, one voice, every voice. They dashed over her as she whisked down the time vortex, their personalities washing over her like the tides. Such impertinence these humans had, bursting in like this, and at such a crucial time. Why their presence could mean so much. Yes, perhaps it was for the best. After all, my goodness, there were some horrible things in this universe. Things that wouldn't ever be nice to anybody. My word, humans did get into a pickle sometimes, and it was dashed uncomfortable being stuck on one planet with them. It was really quite intolerable, and here was the minister on the phone again. It was like some ridiculous cocktail party. Well, I did always like a party, but if I was holding one, I'm sure I wouldn't be invited. Silly sort of things, humans. You know, short lifespans, far too few limbs, but still, there's something rather charming about them, I think. Absolutely. They're very good company in difficult circumstances, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Trying sometimes, but in general, I think they're absolutely splendid. Splendid? Splendid. I have always found them to be trivial, annoying, and unfortunately ubiquitous. I can take them or leave them, preferably the latter. Yes, take them, look after them, use them in games of skill or chance. That's what they'd say, isn't it? Doctor, heal thyself. Doctor, Emily found herself saying, you've lived one hell of a life. The Timewyrm regarded Ace with its stolen eyes. They were glinting with a humour it might have inherited from the body it occupied. Around them the world had grown dark, and things in the pit below were baying and calling. With every second the darkness and confusion increased. This seemed to delight the dragon. You think that this world is the afterlife? No, Ace frowned. Not really. Dunno what it is. It is my natural habitat. I am a computer virus. We're in a computer. Let me finish. I am a computer virus that can live in any sophisticated data processing system. I can take over brains like boils by implanting mechanisms within them, or I can inhabit them totally. A normal human can only fight my control for a short time. This brain has been fighting me for months. This is a mind? Ace looked around with a new realisation. This is a person's memory, their dreams. Exactly. The Timewyrm took a step forward and bared its teeth, hissing. I brought you, Boyle and Hemmings here, as pure data, pure memory. You stand on the bridge between the brain's twin lobes, above the pit of the unconscious. Can't you guess where you are? Oh my God! A horrible suspicion was dawning on Ace. She looked down at the fallen form of the doctor, the blood that was spreading across the rock around him. No! Yes, this isn't just a mind, a vessel for my intelligence. This is a powerful entity, a lord of space and time. Do you not see, human? The Timewyrm's claws burst from their sockets, and the creature bellowed its secret until it echoed from the depths of the pit below. This is the mind of the Doctor.